Welcome to the Being Known podcast with my friend, Dr. Curt Thompson.
And my friend, Pepper Sweeney.
The podcast where we discover and explore what it means to be truly known. Curt, season 2, buddy.
Pepper, man, I'm just almost giddy with this. I mean, I don't know if giddy is the right word for a neuroscientist to be using, but I have been so excited by just the fact that we were able to get the first season completed, and it was such a joy to do it. And I think it's just really built my enthusiasm for what we are wanting to do in the next season.
Absolutely. You know, before we get started, anybody that's on the, maybe watching us on the YouTube channel, on the Being Known YouTube channel, may notice that I have these red blotches all over my face. And I think I should probably give those, some explanation. So,
Pepper, you need to give me some explanation. That's
yes.
for sure.
So, I went to the dermatologist yesterday and had a bunch of stuff frozen off of my face, which is just a lovely thing to experience. My friend and mentor, who I've told you about, who passed a couple of years ago, but Gene Wahlberg, who lived in Southern California. We would meet every Wednesday morning, and Gene was a tennis player. He was an outdoors guy, running outside and everything, and he had a bald head. So some Wednesday mornings, he would come in with just bandages all over his head, and he'd say, I had to go see the sadist, which is what I felt like yesterday. As you said that you were giddy starting this podcast. I'm not kidding. This woman, she was a little bit giddy when she was squirting my face with this stuff, and my arms just awful. Anyway,
the liquid nitrogen
with the liquid nitrogen.
That's right. That's right. Liquid nitrogen cometh.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh.
If you haven't experienced it, I recommend you start using sunscreen now and not when it's too late.
Well, I want to say that this is a prime example of what it means to give me an opportunity to give you the opportunity to be fully known. In addition to our listeners out there, who we are just so grateful that you're participating with us. And we want to say that from the very beginning that we hope that you enjoyed season 1, and you're going to enjoy season 2 even more so, because as Pepper and I both age and go to the sadist, we will be returning week after week with evidence of how we've been closely known by, well, we don't know what to call them, but they right. call themselves dermatologists, but we've got to come up with other names.
We do indeed. Yeah. Okay, Curt, I want to tell you about something that happened to me this week. And I think, hopefully there'll be a transition into what our topic is for this first episode, but that's up to you to figure out. So, 2 days ago, I was driving to pick up my daughter, my youngest daughter. She's in high school, getting ready to be driving herself soon. Hope. Yeah.
Okay. So, can I just say, I'm going to interrupt you just for a second. Can I just say, like, at some point we do have to tell that story about
for sure,
about Hope's coming into the world. So, okay.
Yeah.
So you're driving, you're going to pick her up.
So I'm driving, and I'm on the freeway, expressway, and I'm driving, and the traffic suddenly stops because a truck broke down, and I slam on my brakes, and I knew I needed to go over into the shoulder a little bit, or I was going to have a collision. So I went over into the shoulder. Traffic started moving. I swung back and went on about my way. Got off the freeway a couple of miles later, and as I was pulling off the freeway, a car comes roaring past me, pulls directly in front of me, like on an angle to stop me. And these two young, I'd say 19, 20-year-old girls get out of the car. I don't think they were saying I'm number one, but they both had one finger up in each hand, walking towards my car, screaming. And I have literally no idea like what I could have possibly done to provoke this action. So my first reaction was to kind of chuckle, which was the wrong reaction because it escalated things tremendously. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So there's a girl a foot away from my driver's side window. I'm no prude, but I literally can't repeat the words that she was saying. I mean, it was unbelievable. And I cracked my window a little bit to just say, I have no idea why you're angry with me. I have no idea why this is happening. I said, what did I do that made you so angry? To which she just started spitting at my window and
spitting like
cussing, spitting like cuss, pause, work it up, spit it out. It was,
wow.
It was, and I was just sitting there like, okay, I don't want to escalate this situation any more than I did when I chuckled. I don't want to, so eventually, but I couldn't leave because there was somebody behind me and they were right in front of me. The light turned green, the light turned red, the light turned green. Finally, they got back in their cars. Neither of them explained at all what I had done. I mean, the only thing I think is if I accidentally cut them off and I didn't know it, but this kind of reaction. So today we're talking about integration.
Yes.
Right. And Dan Siegel says that when a person or family group or organization or community experiences chaos, right, that integration is impaired.
Right.
And, in the greater sense, that is community. Those are people in my community. They, obviously don't live too far from me, and they're, and it was chaos.
And in that moment, they were not very far from you at all.
They were not. They were really close. A lot closer than I would have liked.
Right.
So.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, first of all, I'm just I'm a little stunned, and it's funny. We'll eventually get to in this season. We'll eventually get to this whole notion of how we as human beings make meaning of things. But I first of all, I just want to say that however they were making meaning, however they were, perceiving the situation, whatever all the conclusions that they were drawing, the outcome of that was, really pretty unpleasant for you. I mean, I know that if I'm like my heart rate is elevated just listening to this story, and it's going to take me probably the rest of our podcast. And I don't know about you all out there, but you're probably like having images in your head too, like, well, what this was like, and your heart rates are up too. Can if you can just imagine. I think the first thing I want to say to you, Pep, is I'm sorry that happened to you. And I'm really sorry, because like you might say, well, it's two 19-year-old girls, and I'm in my car. I'm not maybe yet afraid for my physical, safety, but those kinds of things are never pleasant to have happen. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry for that happening to you. I really am, because you don't get over those kinds of things like in 30 seconds. I mean, here we are still telling this story.
Yeah. And
the other thing that I'm really both curious about, and also without even knowing the details of their story, I'm really heartbroken at some level. Like, what happened to them?
I thought the same thing.
What happened to them? Not in their kind of imagined encounter with you on the freeway or at some point, but what happened to them when they were 6?
Yeah.
When they were 12, when they were 15, what happened to them that would lead them into this space of utterly chaotic behavior in that regard? And that does it's a perfect example of that. That's one example of what we experience in much of our lives. I think I'm recording here from Arlington, Virginia, and I think it wasn't that long ago that now about a month ago that we had an event here at the nation's capital in which people were in a state of chaos when the Capitol was stormed, and there was all of the violence that took place, and people died, and on and on and on about that story. And people and the question that I was asking even then was not just what happened at the Capitol, but what has happened to the people who participated in that. What happened to them? Not just that day, not just a year ago, but what happened to them when they were also 6 and 16 and 20, such that chaos was the only way that they knew how to operate in that moment. And that brings us to this topic that is really germane to this question of what does it mean for us to be known, for us to be fully known, that we'll continue to come back to. And like, just to highlight right out of the gate again in this second season, that we are a people who deeply long to be known. From the moment we come into the world, I long to be known. I want my mom and my dad and my siblings, if I have them, my friends, my neighbors, I want to be seen. And I want to be seen and received. And I recognize that some of that reception, I'm delighted to be seen in your eyes. And even now, as we're recording and I'm looking at you, I like that smile. Like that smile from the most beautiful man in the world. That smile. Oh, Pep, let me just say, it will never be enough. It will never be enough. Okay. But I'm serious. Like, to be seen by you and to be received by you is something that not only like gives my, fills my heart with joy, but it literally allows my brain activity to be what we would call more integrated. This sense that, we humans, when we come into the world, we say every baby comes into the world wanting, looking for someone, looking for him. I want to be known. But I don't just want to be known, as it turns out, I don't want to be known just on my own terms. Like a toddler, if she or he is, a 2 or 3 year old, if they're, if it's 2 PM and they haven't had their nap and they're hungry, they're going to be behaving perhaps in ways in which their little brain's kind of like all over the place, and it's behaving rather chaotically. And if I'm the toddler, I want to be known by my mom by I want to do what I want to do, and I don't want to go for a nap, and I want a snack, and I want it now, and that's how I want to be known. But the mom says, wait, I'm going to give you some boundaries. I'm going to help you learn how to restrain, because part of what it means to be known is not just to be known for what I want and then give me what I want, when I want it, how I want it. Part of being known also includes my being received into a community that helps me learn what it means to set limits, helps me learn what it means to put restraint on some of my own internal neurophysiological impulses and longings and desires. It's like a thoroughbred that needs to be trained. It's like a great athlete that has certain capacities, but they don't just do whatever they want to do. They train and discipline those kinds of things. And somewhere along the line, we strike this balance. We strike this balance of being received with joy, while at the same time, those impulses of ours that might take us off the highway, that might have us pulling into somebody's lane, jumping out of the car, coming to their car, spitting on their windows while shouting expletives at them, we learned that those things are to be restrained, because being known, being seen, being called out isn't just an end in and of itself. As we've said, we want to be known in order to be called into a world of creating beauty, called into a world of creating goodness, called into a world of repairing ruptures, called into a world where when we see where there is brokenness, when we see where there is difficulty, where we see there is pain, we are going into that place to be an agent of hope and healing, to be an agent of integration ourselves. And this whole notion of being known in the language of interpersonal neurobiology can be understood through this word called integration. And we've spoken of this in the first season a little bit. Here today, we want to take a little deeper dive into what that means, and we're going to define that and give some explanation and some examples of that as well.
So I don't know if you were a fan of The Office, TV show The Office. So because I have 3 kids and they're separated in ages, I've seen The Office, each one of them, like I traveled through it with each one of them a couple of times, right? So we love The Office. So I'm thinking about this scene in The Office where Oscar comes into Michael's office and and he tells him that there's a surplus, and he tries to explain to him what a surplus is, to which Michael says, okay, explain this to me as though I'm 8 years old. And so he gives him this really simple explanation, and he says, why don't you try explaining it to me like I'm 5? So he says, well, mommy and daddy give you money to make a lemonade stand. Michael still doesn't get it.
Yeah.
So I don't think we need to go to the lemonade stand analogy.
Right.
But I know we want to talk about integration and about the 9 domains of integration, but I want to say, talk to me, explain it to me.
Right.
Like I'm me.
Right. Well, I think where the metaphor that I like to use is that if you think about an orchestra that's going to play a symphony, each orchestra has different parts. We've got these different the woodwinds and the brass and the timpani and these different parts of the orchestra. And if we wanted to go listen to, I think Cincinnati has a fine, Phil, a really finer symphony orchestra. And if we were to go hear Cincinnati's orchestra play, I would want to know that each of those different sections of the orchestra have practiced their parts, because we're going to hear Beethoven's 7th Symphony. And of course, this is going to come with all kinds. We're going to come with vocals and everything that's going to come with this. And we want to know that every single part has practiced their part really, really well. And so that's what we call, in just general terms of any kind of system, where we're talking about a family, or we're talking about an orchestra, or we're talking about the human mind, if we're talking about a business, if we're talking about a church, a university, a school. Each part needs to be trained to do its particular part really, really well. I want to know that the violins really, really know their part well. I want to know that each child in a family, it has the sense that its place in the family is being honored. Whether you're the oldest child, whether you're the middle child, the last child, its place is being honored. In the same way, I want to know that in my mind that has multiple different dimensions and different domains of activity. And one of the kind of the shortcut ways that we talk about the mind is this acronym that we use called SIFT. These letters, these 5 letters, SIFTB, that we, and it's an easy way for us to think about what the mind does, that we sense things. I sense things coming to me from outside my mind and inside my mind, physical world, in the world of my body internally. I sense things. I image things. It's rare for us as human beings to talk about much of anything without having a picture of it in my mind. And even when we are by ourselves and we're thinking about things, we have images that accompany the thing that I'm thinking about. And those images themselves pack a pretty powerful punch. As we know from 9/11, one of the things that happened for so many people that became that was traumatizing for them was not just that the event happened, but that they kept watching it over and over, the images over and over and over again on the television. So we sense, we image, we feel. We have these things that we call feelings, and we give words to those feelings. I'm feeling angry. And when I know that feeling angry feels different than feeling joy, and that feels different than feeling sad. So I have feelings, and then I have thoughts. I have this cognition, this cognitive part of me that is thinking even the words that I'm saying right now. So I have these different parts of and functions of my mind. And last, we have this B word, not that B word, but the other B word, and that is the word for behavior. I do things with my body in the world. I feel uncomfortable, and so I cross my arms. I am uncomfortable, and so I stop speaking. I'm joyful because Ohio State beats Clemson. We're not going to talk about the Alabama game. Because we beat Clemson, and I'm jumping out of my chair in my family room. I do things with our body. In this pandemic, what's difficult, I'm restricted in what I want to do with my embodied self. All those different things are important things, just like in the orchestra. They are important parts and functions of our mind that need to be exercised. It's important as I'm growing up in my family, it's important for me that someone helps me understand what I'm sensing, that someone helps me understand the images that are in my mind, and that someone helps me understand my feelings and my thoughts. And one of the ways that and what I'm doing with my body, and one of the ways that we come to exercise an awareness and almost an expertise of awareness when it comes to those particular things has a lot to do with the role of the conductor of the orchestra. Because this then, the conductor, part of their job is to make sure every now and then they'll go practice with the violins, they'll go practice with the strings, with the percussion and so forth. We're just going to make sure that this group, we're just going to focus our attention on this, with the conductor's in charge of that. And we'll get to what the conductor is in just a moment. So we are what we call well differentiated. Each part is a different part, and each part has expertise and practice and attunement and attention that is paid to that part. So hopefully we're growing up in a family in which people actually pay attention to what we feel. So I grew up in a family, for instance, where, it was okay to feel things as long as what you felt was okay. But, far be it for you to become angry or upset at one of my parents. Now, thanks be to God, I grew up in a home where my parents were God-fearers. They loved Jesus. They loved their sons. And they were imperfect. And one of the challenges that my parents had was that I think they didn't really particularly have an easy way of understanding what to do with really uncomfortable emotional states. And so, my father, who was kind and generous and warm and affectionate and a man of principle, but he was also a guy who you didn't want to get him angry. You didn't want, because he's 6'1" and 210 pounds, and you just don't mess around with this guy. And in his home, he was the king. I mean, in many, many good ways, but also in ways in which, if you ever got angry with him, that wasn't ever going to be said. There was no space for that. If you ever got upset about something that he did, there was the common Ohioan disciplinary tactic. You stop your crying, or I'm going to give you something to cry about. Now, outside the fact that that's kind of logically illogical, it doesn't, if you don't want me to cry, then why are you going to give me something to cry about? That just doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense to me. The point was that anger, for me, for instance, was something that I learned that anger was dangerous. I learned that if you're going to be angry, there's threat behind that's coming. And so I worked most of my life just to make sure that I didn't piss off my dad, which meant that by the time I was, out in the world, I'm also now working really hard not to piss off my wife. I'm working really hard not to piss off my employees. I'm working really hard to make sure that nobody gets angry with me. And that's just not a very, it's there's a certain section of my mind, a certain section of the orchestra that just doesn't get any attention from the conductors. Now, they're over there, they've got a part to play, but we're not letting them play. And so for me, there was a part of my orchestra, as it were, that was not very well differentiated. Certain emotion was okay as long as they were okay, but other emotion weren't. Other thoughts that I had, and this maybe I can imagine is true for you too. If your parents aren't being curious about these kinds of things, then you learn to contain them. You learn to hide them. And sometimes you hide them so well that you don't even know that there is a section in the orchestra called the percussion section. You don't even know that. And so this is the part of what it means to be integrated, is that first we differentiate. And some of us grow up in families where parts of our mind's activity are differentiated well. But for many of us, and I think about those two 19-year-old girls that confronted you on the interstate, there are parts of them that somehow didn't get very well differentiated. And by differentiation, we don't just mean that you practice this well, but you also practice knowing where your limits are. Because this then brings us to the second part of differentiation. And along with each of those parts of the orchestra wanting to play their part well, the thing is, they have to know that they're in an orchestra with other parts. They have to know that there are times when I'm now not going to play, or I'm going to play softer because we're going to give space to this other part of the orchestra. There are times when the violins, they are the moment. And then there are times when they back off because we've got to give space for this oboe solo over here. And the oboe is not going to be heard if I've got violas and violins that are just like filling the symphony hall. And so this is the other thing then. We are well differentiated, but we're also linked. Integrated systems, the system of an orchestra is integrated when its well differentiated parts also show a complex sense of linkage, like I'm connected to you. So yes, I have feelings, but I'm also connected to you, which means I want to give you space for what you feel as well. And I can't do that. I can't do that if I'm not also paying attention to you at the same time that I'm paying attention to me. The conductor is essentially really helping each of the parts pay attention to the other parts to bring them together as an integrated whole. In the same way, we would love to know that we've grown up in families where our parents are helping to develop this part of me that senses, but also that feels and that thinks and that does things with my body. In the mind, as far as the brain is concerned, the part of my brain that plays the role of the conductor is this part that we call the middle prefrontal cortex. And for you that are out there, I mean, in our audience, like we're frequently going to be talking about neuroscientific terms in our anatomy and physiology and so forth, because we want to have a whole picture that we're talking about. This middle prefrontal cortex is the part of your brain that sits right behind your forehead. And that for us humans is the part of our brain that ultimately makes us human, that separates us from the rest of all living creatures. It's the part of our brain that plans things, part of our brain that creates things, part of our brain that imagines things, part of our brain that actually is able to think about into the future and to consider consequences for things if we make one choice versus another choice. That is our conductor, but even our own conductor needs to go to conductor school. Like my conductor has to be trained. And so part of what good parenting does, part of what good coaching does, part of what good teaching does, part of what good pastoral care does in the context of the church. What good
friendships, right? What good friendships
Absolutely.
do.
Absolutely. Yeah. What good friendship, what this friendship, yours and mine, does is like it helps train my conductor to do its job. I can't conduct the orchestra of my own mind if I don't first have the opportunity of my conductor going to conductor school. And so the orchestra of my mind, all these different things that I sense and image and feel and think in my behavior, needs to be trained by being known by someone outside of my mind. So that an integrated whole, as Dan Siegel likes to say, integration is like this river that runs between two banks, two extreme banks. And when I'm in a place of integration, the symphony is playing in such a way that all the parts know their parts, but they're also listening very well to the other parts in the symphony because they're watching the conductor. They're listening to the other parts, but they're also watching the conductor. And the two options, these two banks of the rivers that we can find ourselves falling into when we are in disintegrated states, one would be, it would be a place of chaos. On one side of the river is this place of chaos where our mind is just all over the place. There's no sense of any of the different parts of the orchestra knowing what they're supposed to play, nor are they listening to anybody else. And so you walk into the symphony hall, you sit down, and the orchestra just plays whatever they want to play. And they're all over the place.
Right.
I don't want to pay for that.
No.
And that might have been what we saw on the interstate. When they are all over the place. Like in adult bodies, they're behaving, that's like they're having a tantrum. Like we'd say, oh, this would make sense if these two little girls were like 2.5 years old.
Yeah, it wasn't like they were having a tantrum. They were having a full out tantrum. Honestly.
Yeah. And I can just say this, like, unfortunately, I have moments where I'm not actually spitting on people and I'm not shouting expletives, I don't think, but I have moments where internally, like, I want to.
Right.
But hopefully there is enough restraint that has been developed as part of this differentiation process that I can pay attention to there being other elements in there, other people in the room, especially when emotions get high. But if I'm not able to do that, if I'm not able to show restraint, then my emotion can go all over the place. And I'm sure that you and our audience, you've often had experiences, maybe in your own home, maybe in your place of work, maybe in your church, maybe in your marriages, where things feel pretty chaotic. And they can feel chaotic in a moment, or they can feel chaotic in ways like you experienced it on the interstate, in which it's not just a moment, and it becomes traumatic because it shakes up our own internal state of affairs. I say it's kind of like somebody just, bringing some kind of SUV, driving it up onto, the stage at the Symphony and just running over people, right? It's just chaos everywhere. And sometimes, in order to protect against that, instead of being on that bank of the river of integration, we're on the other bank, which is the bank of rigidity. You can imagine that we swing from one side to the other, and rigidity would be something like every single instrument in the orchestra plays the exact same note all the time. There's no differentiation. It's all the same. In fact, it's so much the same that the conductor barely needs to operate. They might be there to keep tempo, but they don't really have to help people listen to one another. They don't have to help people differentiate and to be clear about, the crescendo and decrescendo of the tone of their instrument. They're just all playing the same tone, and they do so perhaps because they're working really, really hard to protect against the possibility of swinging back across the river into states of chaos. And so many of us have also found ways in which, because of the lives that we've lived, our minds occupy states that are rigid. So we may know people who are only able to do things one way. We're going to do my way, or it's the highway. My way, that's the only way that we're going to do it. They work really hard. And so one of the things that, that happened in my home was that because of how it would be that we couldn't become angry, there's a sense in which, okay, I'm just going to live in this way, and anger is going to be cut off. We're just going to shut that off, because otherwise there was the fear that chaos might happen. So we're just going to be rigid in that way. And we find that there are lots of places in our lives in which, when we encounter certain kinds of people, we just go into lockdown. I'm just going to be quiet. This happens in marriages where someone you're upset with somebody, and you're married to the guy who, when you're upset about something, he just he walks away into the family room. He's shutting down. He's going into a place of rigidity because perhaps he's too afraid that the pendulum is going to swing across the river into this place of chaos, and he can't afford that. Or we find people that get pretty obsessed. Now, I don't know if any of you all know anybody who needs to, have things just be a certain way or be in control of things. But that certain sense of rigidity is a way in which certain parts of their mind have kind of been cut out in order for there just to be played, in order for the orchestra just to be played one way, as a way to protect against the possibility of chaos. And so in some respects, we can become people both in our relationships, in our own homes, but also in our places of education, in our church, in our workspace, where we have to work so hard in our rigidity to make sure that we don't become chaotic. But to be known is to have the opportunity to welcome all the things that I'm sensing, imaging, feeling, thinking, and how I want to behave into the room, in order for us to invite the things that are beautiful and good about all that into this space, to be curious about that, to talk about that, to put words to the things that I sense and image and feel, and also to place boundaries around that in order for beauty to emerge. We've talked so much about how, one of the things that we want to do on our show here is to offer the opportunity to give examples of beauty, whether that's in artistic work, whether that's poetic work. And I think back to last season when you quoted Wendell Berry's poem. And I was just amazed just listening to that. I mean, my heart was warmed. And I think about this notion that I've heard that the best poets write the most poetry.
Right.
Because a lot of what they're writing isn't to their standard. But it is this practice of being in this place of practicing, where they can then whittle away at the things that they don't want in order to produce beauty. But in order to produce beauty, you got to be able to even like have your room be cluttered with pieces of paper of the poems that you don't want to, that you don't think are any good. But you don't just publish everything and anything, because you are working to hone. You are working to no, we want the violins. I want to practice this. Oh, let's do it again. Let's do it again. Let's do it again. But also in order for you then to, now let's have you listen to the brass, listen to where this is coming in. And, and Pep, as we think about our times, so much, and we will continue to talk about this as we move through this second season. Our times are fraught with examples of both chaos. We can cite January 6th as one event, but there are so many others where we have racial and political felt senses of fracture and chaos and separation and so forth. But we also have this rigidity that within the particular camps that are against each other, there is a certain rigidity. And the pandemic itself has us in lockdown, as it were, that we're not able to be fluidly connected to each other. It's into this space that I think this notion of being known is so important, that we really want to help all of you that are part of our podcast and listening to us and participating with this. We want this entire community to be a community that can know what it means to live a life of integration, because that word, kind of scientific as it is, represents a world of goodness and beauty. It represents a world in which we are willing, as strange as it may seem, we are willing to receive even the most chaotic things in order to be curious, in order to wonder with those two 19-year-olds, what happened? I see that you're angry, and my heart grieves at that. And I don't want to be afraid of you. I want to be able to not just roll my windows down or get out of my car or talk to you. I'd love to have, when we're able, I'd love to have dinner or a glass of wine on the porch, on the deck, in my kitchen. I want you to be known in such a way that whatever the trauma is that's happened to you can realize healing, can realize hope, can realize regeneration. I want to know that, or somebody with a truck ran over your violin section. Then we repair every last string. We repair every last woodwind. It's been cracked and broken. And then we teach you to play. We teach you to play precisely out of this very space where all the carnage is. It may not be pristine, but we're going to come right to the place where all the carnage is. And that's where we're going to build an orchestra. And we're going to build it out of the very substance of the rigidity and the chaos that's lying all around us. And we do that by being committed to being known one to another.
Explain it to me like I'm 5.
You're a punk.
No, when you were talking about the poetry and the creative and the mess and the being able to, you have to do so much in order to whittle it down. It made me think of, I was reading Bono from U2 was talking about how he could never have done it without a band. Like he couldn't imagine ever been a solo act. I mean, he knew those guys or knows those guys for his whole life, and they get on each other's nerves and all that kind of thing, but there's just no way. And he said, in his opinion, the greatest pop songwriter was Prince. But Prince never had an editor. So he would put out so much content, and he would put out 30 songs, and 2 of them would be absolute genius and brilliant, but he had nobody to grapple with and to, have help him and see him and all that kind of thing, which I thought was a great illustration of that. And I love the illustration that you talked about with Dan Siegel, and how you're on the river, and on one side you've got rigidity, the other side you've got chaos. And what we want is this integration in the middle where we can have wholeness and beauty and goodness. I experienced that I vision myself being on a pair of skis on this river, and like sometimes going over to this side, right? And there's rigidity that comes in, and sometimes going over to this side, and there's chaos, and I'm trying to get my way back to the middle, but I also need somebody that's helping guide me along those ways. So
yeah, and I think it's one of the other reasons why I find the orchestra example at least helpful for me. And of course, since this is really all about me, I'm, why we want to use my examples.
Get used to it, everybody.
You all think that that Pepper and I want to know you. This is really one big personal psychotherapy endeavor for me. That's really what this is about. Phyllis, my wife, commissioned this because she knows that the world needs to be protected from me. The world needs help from, it needs to be helped, because of me. And so I think we know where all this is going. But one of the other things, like, so you mentioned that if you're on a pair of skis in the river, you're being pulled by a boat. I don't know what it's like. I mean, I grew up with my old siblings and cousins learning to ski, and, they would sometimes ski in the Ohio River, and they did that for a certain period of time until they learned. Like, you can't really always safely predict that what's going to come at you. Like, is it going to be a tree log? Is it going to be a wooden bench that somehow floated down the river? If it, like something submerged, so the river of integration isn't a place of perfection, right? It's like an artist's studio. It's the place where we are working at this. And you're right. Like, sometimes we are skiing closer to one bank and then to the other. And one of the beautiful things that happens often in symphonic performances is that, like, you think, like, oh my God, you get done and you listen to Beethoven's Seventh, and you don't even want to leave your seat after it's done, because you just can't believe what you heard. But if you were to go backstage and to talk to all the artists and everybody, they'll tell you about the number of notes that they missed. They'll tell you about the mistakes that they made. They'll talk about how imperfect it was. And yet, the fact is that over the course of the entire symphony, everybody is moving to get each other's back. We're going to cover each other. We're going to make up for stuff. Yes, I missed that cue, but we're going to keep moving, because we are creating beauty, and we are paying more attention to what is before us than we are going to pay attention to the mistake I just made like 2 staff measures ago.
Right.
And I'm going to have other members with me along the way who are helping me continue to move. And so it doesn't mean that in our families or businesses or schools or churches, we never make mistakes. Of course we make mistakes. Of course there are ruptures. Of course there are moments when I get too far to one bank or to the other as I'm skiing. Of course there are like submerged obstacles in the river. And sometimes, like, And this happened. I remember my cousin, like, you know, he runs, he skis, and there's a wooden bench floating. And, you know, he had to, you know, avoid it and almost got hurt badly with this. So there are things that happen to us. And even when painful things happen, these things can happen in the river of integration.
Yeah.
But the real point is, what do we do when that happens? And we'll talk in more detail when we talk about what it means for us to be repairing ruptures and how that's connected to attachment and how that builds resilience. And so I'd love for us all to know that just because we are in this river of integration does not mean that it's going to be painless. It means, however, that even when those painful things happen, when mistakes get made, when I hurt your feelings, and you've hurt my feelings a lot, and I just want you know that, like, I think we're still in a great place because of, even despite that. When those things happen, I'm not going to let you talk because I know that, you know, I'm not going to let you talk.
Emotions are important, but they're not the most important. And just because they're your emotions doesn't mean we all need to tiptoe around you and your little eggshells that you have around your desk. Go ahead.
I just want to say that everything you said was really beautiful. Except the part about my tiptoeing on eggshells, because that's just not true. I don't do that. I don't do that. Except, you know, when I'm with you.
Yes. Yeah. You know, I was thinking about the work environment that I'm in now is really striving for this integration, even if they don't understand it.
Yeah.
You know, I
talk
work with
about that a lot. I want to hear this.
Yeah. So I'm working with a company called the Chandy Group, and the head of the Chandy Group is a woman by the name of Amy Chandy. She's an amazing woman, and she is really good at seeing people's strengths, seeing what people are, like what their thing is, what they're best at, and positioning them in a way that they can operate in their strengths, right?
Yeah.
But it's also, there's an environment that's been created in this company where, first of all, if there's a mistake made, pretty much everybody in the room raises their hand and says, it's my fault. Right.
Yeah.
And when there's credit to be taken, you don't see people raising their hands to say, hey, this is me. I'm the one, put the light on me, which is amazing in itself.
Yeah.
But by all the different parts, and sometimes we've been placed in the wrong parts, right? We've been placed in the wrong position. So, but there is this constant striving within the company to get everyone in the right position so that they can be at their best and at the same time be forced to grow in that position. So it's not just like, oh, you're really good at typing, so we're just gonna let you type all day. It's like, no, you know, you've got to take that skill and broaden it and figure out how, you know, but it is this environment where, and so often just me personally in that environment have felt like I've been put in this great position, not all the time, but where I can really take all of the tools that I have in my toolbox and use them.
Yeah.
And but we haven't really talked about, I mean, we talk about it, we do probably more than other organizations. We do talk about, we're purposeful about it. But as far as like the language of integration and things like that, that we can learn from, I'm really looking forward to this season, the second season, as we're going to go through the 9 domains of integration. And with our remaining couple of minutes, which is really just a couple of minutes, I would love for you to just sort of give us the 10,000 foot, you know, view of where we're going to go this season without getting, you know, too bogged down, Curt.
Yeah. Well, I'll try to speak to the rest of you all, and as adults,
Ignore
and I'll speak
me,
to you,
yes.
and I'll speak to you, Pepper, as the 5-year-old.
The 5-year-old. Thank you.
I'm really looking forward to being able to drill deeper into each of these different domains of the mind. In the same way that the orchestra has these 4 different sections, we talk about these 9 different sections of the mind's activity: our conscious mind, our vertical, our horizontal, all these different ones that we talk about. And again, it's going to be a journey in which we talk about each specific domain in the same way that we would say we really want to help focus on a particular section of the orchestra. We want people to become really familiar with this, deeply familiar with this piece of music, as the violins play it? What does it mean for us to be deeply familiar with our narrative mind's domain? What does it mean for us to know about attachment and so forth? What does it mean for me to understand memory and the role that memory plays? What does it mean for me to pay attention to my body? These different domains mean that just like anything else that we learn well as a skill, whether we're playing the piano, whether we're learning literature, whether we're going to memorize a poem, whether we're going to do your job. I mean, even now, the job that you're doing with the Chandy group, like it's amazing to me what all the things that you're doing, 90% of which is just sweat equity, right? It's like and some of that sweat equity is also in the creative element of that, but you're drilling into these different things and you have developed these different skills that you're doing that come together in that space. And that's what we want people to look forward to, but it's not just an academic exercise. The beauty of this coming season is going to be the stories that we tell that will be examples of these different features of the mind. And we want you all to join us in this, because in the stories that we tell, we believe that everybody's story is going to find some resonance, because we want this podcast to be about being known. We want you to be known in these different domains of your mind that maybe you know something about, maybe you know very little about. We want you to communicate this to others. We want you to be more deeply known in all the different parts of your mind. In order, being known means that we then love God with all of these different parts, and we love our neighbor with all of these different dimensions of our mind. And in the course of being known, we know that we do that on the mission of it, on the journey of creating beauty and goodness in the world, and especially at this time where there's so much carnage that we see as we look around us. And I want us to be known by exploring these particular domains in order for us to create the beauty that God has foreordained before the foundation of the world.
Beautiful. I'm so looking forward to this season, Curt. And this last, 50 minutes that we've spent together, it's just time. No, I'm going to be, would you allow me to be serious for a second? I know it doesn't happen
I've been trying to allow this for like 8-9 years.
It has been time really well spent. And, I'm looking forward to this year. And I want to challenge our listeners this week. Listen to Beethoven's Seventh. Listen to the orchestra. Identify the different parts. Listen to them come together and integrate as one and create beauty and goodness. And sit in it for a while. You'll enjoy it. Thank you, Curt. This is great.
Pepper, thank you so much. It's a joy to do this today, and can't wait for the next time we're together.
Me too. Love you, buddy.
You too.
Okay, so the SIFT bees, the SIFT bee, ideally our parents would embrace that and help us navigate that and understand all of those that come up.
Right.
But to the measure that we receive that, then we kind of try to cobble it together on our own.
Best we can, right?
And one of my favorite... Go.
No, I'm sorry. I would say... I would say... I thought you were telling me to go.
This is the whole linkage. This is the whole linkage thing we're trying to work on. We're trying to work on the linkage thing right here.
But just really quick, as an aside, I would say that I, for one, there are things in here that, my parents did a great job, but for all of us, there's things that were left, not in a great place, or we didn't get support in those areas. And I have specifically sought people out as an adult to get help. Anyway, I'm sorry. I know I'm not supposed to be talking in this part.
And somebody once told me, they said, if it's hysterical, it's historical. And they meant that to be helpful in every way, not not dismissive, but it's it was so helpful because it's like the girls that were so chaotic and assaulting, they assaulted you. And the capital, everybody that was involved with that, it's that is hysterical. And you both had a response of, part of your response was curiosity, what happened to you that this is your response? But what I love is that if it's hysterical, it's historical, and it gives a framework. I love the if blank. I think we've talked about this before. If blank, then blank. If it's hysterical, because like you said, Curt, I have moments of hysteria. And sometimes I'm surprised by them, like, what in the heck? What is happening?
Right.
And it's like, if it's hysterical, then just receive it. Like, be curious about it, not run from it or try to be rigid, because then it comes out sideways and there's no sense to be made of it.
Right.
And so it was
That's really good.
Okay, if it's hysterical, if it's chaotic, don't push it away, embrace it all, receive it all. Don't hurt people. Don't spit at the window. Those things. Let's take that off the table.
Right.
But then in the context of community, be curious about it. And if somebody else is curious about it, like, no, don't stop. Tell me about your anger. Or no.
Right.
So.
Right.
Yeah.
It's all good.
Curt, when you were talking about your dad, Curt, I remember like as a kid, my dad every night come home from work, he'd have dinner. We'd be in the family room in the basement. He'd fall asleep in his lazy boy. And as a family rule, you had to wake him up before you went to bed. But nobody wanted to be the one to wake him up, because it would be this 800-pound gorilla when you woke him up, you know.
Wait, why was that rule there? Why did you have to wake him up before you went to bed?
Because my dad didn't want to sleep in the chair all night. He wanted to go to bed, so you had to wake Dad up before you went to bed. Like,
so
if he woke up, yeah. I don't really know
how that happened.
I don't remember him specifically saying I have to do this, but we knew that we had to do it.
Right. I'm just picturing that if I'm in your family, I was going to say, like, I'm thinking, like, I'm going to bed as soon as I can.
So here's what would happen. Me and my sisters would all be watching a TV show, and when it would start to get to be towards the end of the show, we'd start to slide towards the stairs. And all of a sudden, it's this fight as we're all like going up the stairs, knocking people out of the way, so we didn't have to be the one that woke him up. Sometimes you'd leave before you knew what happened at the end of the program because you just didn't want to be the one to have to wake him up. It's hysterical, so it's historical.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Amy, I haven't heard that phrase, but I love that phrase. I love that phrase. Mm-hmm. That's really great.
Because then it's like, it's hysterical. So there's got to be some history to it. So I can be curious about the history and I can settle into it.
Yeah. Right on.
Yeah.
Right on.
Awesome.
So embrace the SIFT B.
Yeah.
They're all welcome.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll be talking about that pretty directly, about how to do that, when in the very next episode. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, guys. See you next week.
See you next
Bye.
week.
This podcast is produced by Curt Thompson, Pepper Sweeney, and myself, Amy Chella. Audio production and music is by Keaton Simons. If you'd like to connect with us, you can visit us on our website, beingknownpodcast.com, or you can find us on social media at beingknownpod. Be well, be known.